All right, welcome back to World History. Today we're learning about Chapter 14, so let's get into it. We're back to China. Last time we learned about Taoism and a little bit about Buddhism, and we learned about Confucianism. Now it is much later, and so we're going to see the impact that some of those Confucius values had on the development of China. So we'll learn about the Tang and the Song dynasties. We'll learn about some big cities, new inventions, okay, that are going to be important. So make sure you know what those inventions are. Now, if you don't remember what Confucianism was, don't worry. We can revisit that. But what we're really seeing here is Confucianism last time was like a seed that's getting planted, and now it's many years later, and we're going to get to see how that seed has grown into the society, all right? Then we're also going to talk about the Mongol Empire, which takes over a lot of land very fast, but much like Alexander the Great, they're good at conquering, not necessarily good at ruling. They're not necessarily good at setting up a lasting bureaucracy. And so we have Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan. All right. So how does Kaifeng resemble a modern day city? This is a city of 1 million people. It's got shops, it's got restaurants, it's got culture, okay? Inventions, there's more than just these, but for now, we have the compass, we have porcelain, we have gunpowder. And then who are the Mongols? They had the largest empire in history. Here's our timeline. So last time, we were in the old, I just made the slide move. I'm sorry, it's okay. We got another timeline right here. But like, if you remember, who built the Great Wall of China? Okay, Qin Dynasty, Great Wall is over in this area. And so last time, we were kind of learning about these dynasties. And now we are pretty far down the list that way. Oh, that's the period of disunion when there wasn't really an empire of any type. Okay, here's another timeline just showing you that we've advanced quite a bit. Okay, here's the geography I want you to know. Yellow River, Yangtze River, they're back. If you know where they are because you learned it the first time, you got easy points. Let's say you didn't learn it the first time. You get another chance, no big deal. Some cities, Beijing and Shanghai, and then I want you to know where Korea is, and that can be North and South Korea, and then something called the South China Sea. Very important geostrategic location, so I want you to be able to find that on a map. And for your review, if you don't remember, you can learn right now. Look for this. It looks almost like I'm talking about this little thing right here. It almost looks like a dog or a dragon face, and then you've got the river coming out of that, and that's your Yellow River. And then down here, you've got your Yangtze River. Feel good? Okay. Let's go back and take a look at these cities. So I'm going to call this a dragon, okay? But it can be whatever animal you want. I'm hoping you guys see a little animal face right here. And then Beijing's going to be right up here, kind of like above the nose, if that makes sense. I hope that this is helping you. And then let's go look for Shanghai. Shanghai, what I do is I look for this little thing here and this little thing right there, and you just put Shanghai somewhere here in the middle, and that's close enough for me. Okay, that's going to be real close. So let me highlight these yellow dots so that we understand. There's Shanghai, there's Beijing. Those are the two cities you got to know. Let's keep going. Okay, South China Sea. You find China on the map, and it's over in here, and you just go south, and this is the South China Sea right there. How do we feel about that? Can we find that on a map? Excellent. So I want you to know where it is, and then I want you to know why it's important. And you'll watch a quick video on it, and you'll see that it's basically important because so many countries claim that land. That land has natural resources, and it's also an important trade route. There's China right there.
This is Fiery Cross Island. It's a little more than 1 square mile in size, and it's home to a Chinese military base. There's a 10,000-foot airstrip, an advanced radar station, a missile defense system, and about 200 troops. But the strangest thing about Fiery Cross Island is that 2 years ago, it didn't exist. And neither did the 6 other Chinese military bases that have been built on man-made islands in the South China Sea. If you look at this satellite image from 2014, you can see huge Chinese ships collecting around remote reefs in the Spratly Islands, an archipelago in the South China Sea. In this image, these ships are rapidly pumping sand and rock up onto the reef. They're building islands. And less than a year later, the Chinese had seaports, air bases, and buildings on their new island, and the world had taken notice.
We continue our look this morning at what China does not want you to see. The superpower is reclaiming land
in 7 spots in the South China Sea,
adding on average more than 3.5 acres every day.
See, with these islands, China's trying to lay claim to one of the most important areas of ocean in the world, the South China Sea. The South China Sea is incredibly rich in natural resources. 11 billion barrels of oil, 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 10% of the world's fisheries. Most importantly though, 30% of the world's shipping trade flows through here, to the booming population centers and economic markets of Southeast Asia. It's an extremely important body of water, and right now 5 countries lay claim to some part of it. Now, most countries base their claim off the UN Law of the Seas, which says a country's territorial waters extend 200 miles off their shore, an area called the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. Countries have exclusive rights to all the resources and trade in their EEZ. It's their sovereign territory. So for example, any oil that's found within 200 miles off the coast of Vietnam belongs exclusively to Vietnam. But any area that isn't in an EEZ is regarded as international waters, and it falls under UN maritime law, which means everybody shares it. Now, every country in the South China Sea region uses this 200-mile EEZ threshold to determine its claims. All except China. China argues they have a historical claim to the South China Sea, dating back to naval expeditions in the 15th century. And they mark it using a really confusing border called the Nine-Dash Line. Following World War II, Japan, who had dominated the entire region, lost all control of its surrounding seas. China used the moment to claim the South China Sea by drawing this imprecise line on the map that encompassed 90% of the South China Sea. It became known as the Nine-Dash Line. And when the UN established the 200-mile EEZ in 1973, China stuck to its own line, refusing to clarify its boundaries and ignoring claims by other countries. Now that brings us to the Spratly Islands. It's a remote, barely inhabited cluster of islands currently claimed by China, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. The Spratlys are both geographically and symbolically at the heart of the South China Sea. That's because any country that can claim the Spratly Islands can extend their EEZs to include them and gain exclusive rights to the surrounding territory. But it's really hard to legitimately claim uninhabited piles of sand, so a few nations have built small buildings and ports on their claimed islands, and even stuck a few people there. But China believes all of the Spratly Islands belong to them, which brings us back to why they're building islands there. Installing military bases on these new artificial islands took the dispute to a whole new level, showing how China is potentially willing to defend its claims with force. Now, this is about when the United States took notice. While the US has no claim in the South China Sea, it is the world's lone superpower and uses its massive navy to defend international waters. But China sees the US presence in the area as an encroachment in their backyard. When a US destroyer ship sailed just 12 miles off the shore of one of China's man-made islands in the Spratlys, China sent out their own destroyer and a patrol boat as a warning. China's building these islands in order to increase control around the surrounding waters, using a strategy that they've deemed the cabbage strategy, where they surround a contested island with as many ships as possible. In May of 2013, China sent several ships to Ayungin Shoal, which is just 105 nautical miles off the coast of the Philippines, well within that 200-mile EEZ. The Philippines has 8 soldiers stationed there. Like wrapping leaves around a cabbage, the Chinese sealed off the Philippines' access to Ayungin Shoal with fishing boats, surveillance ships, and Navy destroyers, creating a blockade so that the Filipinos can't receive shipments of food and supplies. By building their own man-made islands, China is essentially building naval bases. The more islands they have, the more ships they can support and the more territory they can slowly take control of. And the Chinese cautiously use the cabbage strategy in the Spratly Islands, taking over contested territory, but in small steps, avoiding the possibility of igniting a bigger conflict. But the disputes are intensifying. Countries are now actively arresting trespassers in waters that they claim. And China could go a step further. Since 2015, they've threatened to declare an air identification zone above the South China Sea, declaring that all aircraft that fly through it would need Chinese permission. Now, publicly, China insists that their intentions are not militaristic, but their actions say otherwise, and it's heightening tensions in the region. Steve Bannon, who sits on the US National Security Council and who is one of President Trump's closest advisors, is almost certain that the US will go to war in the South China Sea.
We're going to war in the South China Sea. I was a sailor there, a naval officer. We're going to war in the South China Sea in 5 to 10 years, aren't we? There's no doubt about it.
But for now, the disputes remain only in the legal and diplomatic realms that only occasionally break into minor clashes. In July 2016, the International Court at The Hague ruled in favor of the Philippines, who charged China with invading their rightful territory in the South China Sea. But China dismissed the ruling, and enforcement of the law doesn't seem likely, even from the US, who released a vague statement urging the two countries to clarify their claims and work together to resolve their disputes, which is another way of saying we don't really want to deal with this. In fact, as the conflict escalates and international courts get involved, the US is stuck in a tricky position. On one hand, they do not want to risk provoking a conflict with China, but on the other, they want China to stop bullying their allies in the region. Up until now, the US has managed the situation by continuing to patrol through the South China Sea. It's also likely that the US would fly fighter jets above the sea if China actually does declare an air identification zone. These are symbolic but effective ways of keeping China in check while not getting too involved in the details of the conflict. So far, the disputes in the South China Sea have not become violent, but countries are starting to defend their claims by increasing troop numbers, weaponizing their territory, and provoking each other. It's a complex situation that will continue to gain international attention, for better or for worse.
Okay, so let's talk about China just in the modern context real quick. China has about 1 billion people more than the United States, and they are the number 2 economy, where the United States is the number 1 economy. And so it's important to learn about China and how they develop, since they're quasi our friend, quasi competition. Okay, we need to know this sort of stuff. So during the Sui dynasty, they're going to build the Grand Canal, and that's fine. I want you to know what the Grand Canal is, but there's something else I want you to know, and that is, why do you need a canal? Why do we built the Erie Canal? Why do countries build canals? The answer is, it's always cheaper to move things on water. Okay, water is the cheapest form of transportation for goods, all right? And so even today, shipping containers, stuff like that. Now, you've got this new canal, you start trading items. What else is going to move along the canal besides just the goods? Ideas, okay? Ideas will move along the canal. That's important. Always associate the two. Now, we're going to talk about Empress Wu. She's important for a couple of reasons, but the number one reason is she chose her advisors based on ability rather than rank. And so here's what's going to happen. Before this time period, usually, how did you get the job? Your dad had the job, or your uncle, someone in your family had the job. You were born into the job, or it was all about who you knew. If you knew the right people, then you'd get the right job. With the Mongols and here with Empress Wu, things are going to change. We're going to want people that are competent, and we're going to test them, and we're going to make sure that we get the best people for the job. And that's sort of a radical idea at this time.
We are told Wu Zetian was ruthless in her reign. Now, archaeologists are unearthing new evidence from Wu's era that may at last challenge this version of her story. Professor Cheng Jianlin is the world's leading archaeologist of the Tang era. Historian Dr. Harry Rothschild has heard about some intriguing tomb figurines of women found recently that date to Wu's reign.
Whoa. It's amazing seeing all these Tang artifacts. I've been studying Wu Zhao, Wu Zetian, for 17 years. And finally, here we are at ground zero. You can sense her everywhere here in Chang'an.
The figurines depict Chang'an's musicians, traders, and nobility. They are buried alongside the dead to ensure a wealthy afterlife, and they give clues to what changed in society during Wu Zetian's era.
Here we can see a lady riding on a red horse going on a trip somewhere. That shows women are free to do things in that society at that time. Here we can see that there is another fashion, which is a lady wearing men's clothes. It is because at that time, women can do everything that men do, like riding, hunting, or traveling. During Wu Zetian's period, women's standing became higher than ever before.
Wu had ensured that during her reign, it was a good time to be a woman in China, and that freedom to flourish went to the very top of her court. She surrounded herself with women, including appointing a female prime minister.
All right, so let's talk about some ways of thinking. This is where we're getting into a little bit of the review. Do you remember Buddhism, Confucianism? Did I say that right? Let's try again. Confucianism. There we go. And Taoism. All right, listen. Buddhism says, remember Buddha said, you want things and you suffer, okay? Because you want things. You either want what you don't have or you want to hold on what you do have. Confucianism had two parts that I wanted you to remember. One was know your role. Remember, the grass bows to the wind. Remember this? Remember this? It's coming back, right? Okay. Know your role. Are you the father? Are you the son? You should know your place in society. And then Taoism was effortless action. They called that Wei Wei. Okay, Wei Wei. Effortless action. Learn from nature. The tree doesn't stress out, yet the tree still grows. Okay. Cool. What is the period of disunion? It's when there's no central empire. All right, there's no or central leadership. It's broken down into a bunch of fiefdoms, and they fight each other basically. Oh, cool. I have it as a slide. Here we go. A period of time with no centralized government. China was split over competing kingdoms ruled by warlords. There we go. That's what I just said. Perfect. Okay, that's the period of disunion right there. Okay, spread of Buddhism. Why would Buddhism spread during the period of disunion? Because people were suffering, and Buddhism is sort of, the answer to their suffering, if that makes sense. People find comfort in the teachings of Buddha during this time, and this is why Buddhism has a big footprint in Chinese culture. Okay. We have some Chinese inventions. We have porcelain. We have gunpowder. We have compass. Many, many years earlier, we had paper. That was back in the day. And I'm going to show you also the movable type.
In the middle of the coastline along the East China, there is a tourist attraction city, Rian, an ancient city with a history of more than 1,000 years. The mobile type of printing has found its heritage in two villages in the southwest mountainous region of the city. One is called Dongyuan Village in Pingyangken Township, and the other is called Xiqian Village in Caochun Township. This is the only known place where this ancient printing technique is still being used today. In the middle of the 11th century, Bishan invented the clay mobile type of printing technique. And later, in the middle 12th century, it was used for the printing of Buddhist straw in the Western Xia dynasty. Afterwards, movable characters made of bronze and tin appeared. At present, in some places of Rian, Zhejiang province, mobile type of printing is still being used. According to the record of genealogy of Clan Wang in Taiyuan Prefecture, in the early 13th century, a person named Wang Famao began to compile and printing genealogy of families and clans for the local folks. This technique has ever since become an important way of living for the Wang descendants and thus passed on from generation to generation. The printing and binding of the ancient mobile type of printing technique are very primitive. Since only a few copies of the genealogy of clan are needed, all the printing work is done by hand. The following are the main technological processes. Modes of characters. Molds must be made in the first place. This is done by selecting a kind of wood called birch leaf pear, which is both hard and tough. These molds will then be polished so that the characters can be written on and engraved easily. Character writing and engraving. In movable type printing, character writing and engraving is not an easy job. First, one should use a writing brush to write the characters to be engraved on the wooden molds reversely. The script is old song typeface, an official typeface used in the old times on occasions such as making notices and announcements. The key points to engravings are:
All right, Confucianism in the government. What was Confucianism? Remember, it had two parts: know your role and rituals matter, okay? And Confucius was not embraced necessarily in his time. Now he's super duper embraced. You've got to learn Confucius if you want to take place in the government. All right, everyone has to know their role. You have to take a test. You study for years, and if you pass the test, then you become an official. Again, this is different than knowing your uncle and then he gets you the job. Okay, this is trying to put people in the position of power that actually know what they're doing. Okay, we're going to talk about the Mongols now, Mongolia, and they're going to spread from northern China. For those of you that don't see it on the map, they are right here, and in a minute they're going to be just about everywhere. So there they are, spreading out. Largest empire, one of the quickest spreads ever, but then they also fall apart fairly quickly. Again, sometimes it's easier to destroy and expand, and it's harder to last because lasting takes paperwork and bureaucracy and things like that. And usually groups of people that are warlike people or good at war are not necessarily good at running the country once they create it. Here's their expansion again on another map. You can see they go all the way to Europe, into Turkey, into Iran. Very expansive empire. Okay, here we go. Let's talk about who is involved in this. You have Genghis Khan. He gets the tribes organized in northern China, but it's really his grandson Kublai Khan that takes over and expands the empire to its furthest reaches. And then in China, they call it the Yuan Dynasty, and it's the first time that foreigners had ruled all of China from outside. And so let's talk more about Genghis Khan. Oh, here's some pictures. Oh, I do want to mention this. Who are the Mongols? They're people that live in a very harsh environment in northern China, and they make their living hunting food and gathering, and there's not a lot to gather, so it's more hunting. So when it comes to horses and shooting animals for survival, that's what they do for a living. So when it turns out that these skills can be quickly militarized, does that make sense? If you're like riding around on a horse and shooting your food, and now someone says ride around on a horse and shoot that person over there, they're going to be good at that. That's why their army is quick to conquer. Okay, so Genghis Khan, his father's poisoned, his brother's killed, his wife is kidnapped. He gets different tribes and different leaders of other tribes to help him rescue his wife, and in doing so becomes very very respected as a leader. And then once these tribes are united, they are able to expand out beyond what their traditional borders are. Okay, again, we talked about this with Empress Wu. Promotes people based on skill rather than family line or association. This is a new concept, and when you are promoting people based on skill, and you go against an enemy that's not promoting based on skill, they're promoting based on who your father was or who your mother was or something like that, some type of association, then you're going to be more skillful by definition, and then you're going to run them over, and that's what happens. When you increase trade, what else do you increase? Okay, communication. In this case, food. Okay, food is going to spread across the Mongol Empire. Rice is going to get associated in places that didn't have rice before. They also were very tolerant of religion. They really just wanted your tax money. They don't care necessarily what you believe, as long as you believe in giving them money. All right. Killed millions, improved trade, improved communication. This is a key point too. I don't know if it's a test question, but you should understand empires, we generally look at them as a negative thing, but one thing that's very positive about an empire is that it protects the roads. And when you protect the roads, you improve trade. And with trade comes new technologies, but what else comes when you have all these people mixing around this big area for the first time? You've got disease, and it spreads, all right?
First, the Khan man. Genghis Khan was a Mongol political and military leader, or Khan, who sometimes brutally conquered and united the Mongol tribes and founded the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in world history. He forged a powerful army and became one of the most significant and successful military leaders in history. The Mongol Empire then ended up ruling, or at least briefly conquering, large parts of modern-day China,
Mongolia, Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Moldova, South Korea, North Korea,
and Kuwait. You guys got all that, right? This made Genghis Khan the most successful empire builder ever, and after his death, it would grow even larger under his son and grandson. Mongol armies pushed into Persia and gained control of all of China. Genghis Khan's huge empire brought a cohesive and peaceful political environment. This allowed increased communication and trade between the West, Middle East, and Asia. This openness meant that these two previously separate worlds could begin to trade with each other. In the late 1200s, a Venetian explorer named Marco Polo became one of the first Europeans to travel what would later be called the Silk Road to China. Polo, together with his father Niccolo and his uncle Maffeo, traveled to China visiting Kublai Khan, the then ruler and grandson of the great Genghis Khan. The Silk Road was a series of interconnected trade routes through various regions of the Eurasian continent, mainly connecting China with Asia Minor and the Mediterranean. It extended over 5,000 miles on land and sea, and as we will see, this trade helped to lay the foundations for the modern world.
All right, we got one last thing to learn and then we're done. It looks like a lot, but you can get it pretty quickly. Let's talk about the treasure fleet. Okay, China has the most advanced fleet in the world at this time. It's called the treasure fleet. You can see how they sail around. They go around Africa and they sail all over the place. They even, look at the size of the ships. They're giant. They even had, they could grow food like on the deck of the ship. It was absolutely amazing. This is where it's voyages of the treasure fleet. Did they make it to America? Okay. Some people think that the treasure fleet got over here to the coast of America before Columbus. There is evidence that that is possible.
During a time of great prosperity and peace in the flourishing garden of Islam, when philosophers and scholars excelled all others in the quality of their writing, and scientists and inventors devised the most marvelous of innovations, adventurers and travelers would go where none of their kind had gone before. Around the year 1529, Ming Emperor Shizong burnt hundreds of logbooks, the final act in destroying evidence of China's supremacy in naval power. Lost for more than 500 years, accounts of a mighty Chinese armada were rediscovered in Fujian province in the 1930s. Etched on a pillar, they told of gigantic ships laden with gifts for distant kings, from whom the Ming Emperor exacted tribute in return. Between 1405 and 1433, the treasure fleet set out on 7 voyages into the unknown. At the helm of these vast armadas was a 2-meter-tall warrior navigator, the Muslim admiral of the fleet, Zheng He. By the end of his final voyage, his fleet had covered over 50,000 kilometers, having anchored in the most famous ports of the time. From China to India, from the Arabian Sea to the east coast of Africa, Zheng He led his ships further than anyone before. Following the religion of Islam, young Zheng grew up in Kunyang, part of the then Mongol Empire. But his boyhood life was to change on his 11th birthday. In 1382, when imperial Ming armies conquered Kunyang, Zheng was captured and made a eunuch page of a prince, Zhu Di. As fortune would have it, when Zhu Di seized the Chinese throne, Zheng He became his confidant. First rebuilding the Great Wall, Zhu Di then embarked on a massive shipbuilding program and appointed Zheng He as Admiral of the Western Seas, ordering him to go beyond the horizon. Comprising almost 28,000 men and over 300 ships known as swimming dragons, Zheng He's fleets included massive treasure galleons, which were technological marvels of the age. 400 feet long and 160 wide, with 9 masts, they were almost 5 times the size of Portuguese caravels, which would sail into the Indian Ocean only 50 years later. With a crew of 1,000 men, the ships took enough food to last them for years at sea, and included tubs of earth on deck so that vegetables and fruit could be grown. Beneath were kept the treasures with which to impress their hosts, while within watertight holds, horses were stowed for the cavalry. Zheng He often astonished his emperor by returning with extravagant tributes, of which the most amazing was acquired on his 4th voyage in 1414. In the kingdom of Bengal, Zheng persuaded the ruler to part with an animal given him by an African king. To much excitement, when the giraffe arrived at the imperial court in Beijing, the emperor's philosophers celebrated it as the fabled unicorn, an animal associated with an age of peace and prosperity. Now a hero, Zheng He set sail for his 4th and most ambitious voyage, to Arabia, where he fulfilled his personal pilgrimage to Mecca and finally reached Africa, stopping at Mogadishu, Mombasa and Zanzibar. Thought to have traveled as far south as the Mozambique Channel, Zheng He vastly outdid his Western contemporaries in their own age of exploration. Could he have even rounded the Cape of Good Hope and gone as far as America, as some historians claim? But after his death at sea on his 7th and final trip in 1433, a new emperor assumed the throne of the Ming dynasty and began to dismantle Zheng's navy, with the effect that China went from being a superpower into isolation. Yet Zheng He's epic voyages of adventure are remembered by porcelain shards which still wash up on the beaches of East Africa, and the etchings on the pillar left in a temple.
Okay, so last concept I want you to get here is called isolationism, a policy of avoiding contact with other countries. That's where we're going to end with China today. They had spread out. They have this treasure fleet, but then they just get rid of it. They decide they don't want the influence of the world in China. Here's the problem. What makes you wealthy? Trade. And so when you stop trading, what's going to happen? You're going to go down while the rest of the world goes up. When you trade items, what else do you trade? Ideas. And so now your technology is going to stay stagnant while the rest of the world's technology is improving, and suddenly you're left behind. That is the problem in general with isolationism, that you're going to get left behind technologically.
Countries frequently try to weaken their currencies in an effort to boost exports and ultimately the economy. However, once one country does it, others want to follow suit and currency wars can result, as mentioned in another video. However, once currency depreciations no longer work and the economy keeps underperforming, politicians want to find someone to blame and usually end up blaming other countries. As such, governments start adopting isolationist policies which limits trade. Their way of thinking revolves around the idea that by limiting international trade, they keep jobs at home and thereby help the country. However, international trade is often a great solution for overcoming inefficiencies. For example, it should be obvious why Switzerland is better off importing oranges from Greece rather than growing them itself due to climate issues. Or how if rich countries stop importing easy-to-manufacture goods from countries with cheaper labor costs and instead produce those goods themselves, those products might end up being ridiculously expensive. It's kind of like paying a rocket scientist who charges $300 per hour to clean your house. You can do it, but it's a waste of money. Also, it's usually only a matter of time until things degenerate politically. It's easy to think that countries can simply limit certain imports and everything else will be fine. But once country A implements an isolationist policy against country B will retaliate and so on. Therefore, in the real world, isolationist policies tend to be taken too far for political reasons. The main risk should come as no surprise. Trade wars can end up gradually increasing tensions among countries, and as such, real wars can follow.